He asked where the killer was, but at the same time, he noticed someone. He quickly turned around and saw a doppelganger who had just killed a player. Upon finding them, he immediately attacked the doppelganger, causing several injuries. The doppelganger was killed. The number of remaining doppelganger players is now Lee. While observing the doppelganger, he thought that the doppelganger might be the killer, but it turned out to be different from what he had assumed. Nevertheless, he was glad to have killed them before they could cause more harm. However, at the same time, June, who was severely injured, was lying among the bushes. He asked if it was really Lee, and as he fell, he told Lee to be careful of the doppelganger before passing out. A few minutes later, Lee helped June move, but with difficulty speaking, June expressed his regret, saying that if he hadn't let the doppelganger escape, others wouldn't have died. Angrily, he said that the thought of someone who looked like him roaming around and hurting others made him feel terrible. Hearing this, Lee told him it wasn't his fault because they were all victims of the tower and should focus on escaping the tower safely. At the same time, he saw two people, Isial and Juno, where Isial sighed in relief, saying that both had survived and she was worried after hearing that players had died. Juno added that he was also worried and couldn't believe that 2 players had been killed, but Isial, as she began to use her magic, asked June if he was injured because she was going to heal him. However, Lee drew his sword and told June to step back because the 2 were doppelganger. Hearing that, the expressions of both doppelganger immediately changed, and one of Juno doppelganger attacked, asking Lee if he held a grudge for what happened on the death mission. While June told Lee to take care of Joel, he wondered why the doppelganger were so bold in front of him, especially if one of them had Isial's memories, meaning they knew how strong she really was. But at the same time, Isial's doppelganger moved from behind Lee. However, Lee noticed in time, dodging the attack, but Juno doppelganger quickly took advantage of the situation to attack him as well. Lee, realizing this, dodged the attack by jumping and then maneuvered in the air. As he landed on the ground, an arrow was aimed at his head, but it struck a tree as Lee narrowly avoided it. As Lee observed who shot the arrow, it turned out to be June, who, with a different expression, said it was unfortunate because he thought he had achieved checkmate. While the doppelganger started walking to stand beside June, we flash back to a few minutes earlier where Lee had taken out one of the doppelganger, but June saw Lee, so he immediately smiled, and as June drew his arrow, it was mentioned that he used to work as a fisherman. He then stabbed his own arrow into his back to represent himself as bait, and with a big evil grin, he said that now he was going to start a human hunt. After that, we return to the present where June tells Lee that he spoke in dialect without realizing it, and it seems he was too excited. He then asked Lee what he felt at that moment. Furthermore, he asked if Lee felt emotions of betrayal, futility, or anger while laughing hysterically. However, Lee, with a smile, said he wondered if June would show his true colors, and upon seeing him, it seemed June was crazier than he thought. June, hearing this, said that Lee spoke as if he knew June would stab him in the back, but as Lee helped him walk, he stared at him sharply. So, he said that he could see others' status windows, and their stats had increased drastically, making it clear that June was the killer. However, June said that this was becoming more interesting over time and asked if Lee had received help from the tower because he was so jealous of it. However, Lee asked why June did it, as he had come to the point of killing others for gold and stats. June, while laughing, asked if he needed a reason because in this beautiful world, if he killed people, not only was he not punished, but he was also rewarded. Then, as he released his arrow, he asked how they could not kill anyone, and while Lee remembered June earlier, he wondered if he had a situation that made him do it, but he was wrong. As the arrow quickly headed towards him, he dodged it to slide towards Kim Junan. Meanwhile, it was said that Kim Junan was just wearing a mask and had been holding back for a moment like this, and that type was just a simple psychopathic killer. But at the same time, the doppelganger saw that Lee was moving quickly toward June, and they both attacked Lee. Lee, after dodging and putting some distance between him and the doppelganger, quickly saw an arrow aimed at him. However, he sliced the arrow in two. But there was a second arrow aimed at his head, so he quickly turned to avoid the arrow, which hit a tree, leaving a large hole. Lee, seeing the attack, said that Kin hadn't shown all his cards yet. Then he turned towards the doppelganger and said that the best hand-to-hand fighter, healer in the area, and a stronger long-range attacker than the doppelganger formed a combination with no gaps. So, he told King Junsi that he didn't know how to convince the doppelganger, but it seemed like he was well prepared. Kim Jun, with a wide smile, said that if he wanted to catch something big, he had to do that. Besides, he thought it would fall more easily, but it was quite tough. While manipulating an arrow in his hand, he said that it was much better because he could watch it fight in pain until death. Then he began to tense his bow while asking the doppelganger what they were doing, as it was time to raise their net and attack simultaneously. However, Lee, with a serious expression, started to activate his perfect senses, allowing him to see all around him. As the enemies approached, he said while observing the doppelganger stats that they were a very balanced group. However, against overwhelming power, a good team composition means nothing. The current number of doppelganger players. Ken, seeing Lee easily defeat the doppelganger, began to feel quite nervous. Then he knelt on the ground and begged Lee with tears to spare his life, saying that he had been obsessed with the reward and had gone mad for a moment. He was shocked after seeing how strong Lee was, realizing that he had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Trembling, he begged Lee to send him to hell just this once. However, Lee quickly cut him in half. As Lee's upper half floated in the air, he cursed and said that his bait was not just to catch small fish but something bigger. The current number of doppelganger players. With Lee's sword drenched in blood, he said that he had to kill a living human. But at the same time, the system notified him that the player who accepted the challenge to become a star killer had died. You have gained the opportunity to become the star killer instead. If you accept the challenge to become a star killer, you will receive a stat boost and support from the doppelganger. If you ultimately become the star killer, you will receive great benefits. Meanwhile, he was surrounded by a mist that began to gather at one point, transforming into some sort of doppelganger extending a hand. While the system asked if he wanted to accept the challenge, Lee saw the notification and said that was why Kim Jun-sun could lead the doppelganger. The benefits you will receive when you become the star killer: legendary rank equipment, legendary rank abilities, rapid stat point increase, exclusive star killer rank. Seeing these benefits, Lee wondered why there were such absurd rewards. However, he started to recall what happened with the doppelganger and said that although he didn't like killing the doppelganger, he could penetrate them because he knew they weren't human. But now, he was facing a situation where he had to fight against humans, and one of them might be another challenger trying to become the star killer. It could even be someone who, in the future, would become the star killer. So he looked at all the notifications and then headed to the bar that asked if he wanted to accept the challenge. But at the same time, he refused the challenge because he wouldn't become a crazy psychopath like June. After that, Lee arrived with other players, where Kim, with his typical expression, asked why he was late. Lee looked at him, drew his sword, and said that he had to become a crazy psychopath. Then he told everyone that he knew it was hard to follow his proposal. So he thanked them for following him. While some players had doppelganger beside them, they asked what they should do now. Others asked if Lee could really distinguish who the doppelganger was. He answered firmly and said that first. However, at the same time, someone said that he thanked everyone for following his instructions. As someone approached the group, Lee turned around, saw him, and said that he had appeared. It was then revealed that the players were confused because there were two Lees. The players asked which of the two Lees they could trust. Someone asked if Lee had already predicted this situation. While the two Lees stared at each other, the Real Lee said that this situation was complicated, and he had planned to eliminate his duplicate before getting here. However, his plan failed due to an unexpected variable known as June. In that situation, it was as if a chess match was unfolding between him and his duplicate. In the middle of this situation, a player asked who the real Lee was, while another wanted more explanation. Lee revealed that he had eliminated several duplicates. 8 people had either a dead duplicate or a dead player. If he revealed the identities of the 5 duplicates he eliminated, he was confident he could prove that he was the real player. As he began to name them, his duplicate listed different names except for Lee and Isial, claiming that their duplicates had been eliminated. This caused confusion among the players. Lee tried to think of a way to prove he was the real player, but his duplicate acted first, encouraging everyone to think carefully. Isial and a red-haired player were reminded that they had once been in the same group and had built trust. He argued that it was more likely he had eliminated their duplicates. Lee realized that his duplicate had taken the first step, causing the players to start doubting him. A woman in the back asked if this wasn't too obvious, but Isial mentioned that there was no guarantee that it wasn't possible. While everyone was thinking, the duplicate Lee claimed that if his false statements were true, then June was a duplicate, meaning he had killed the real June. June was known as a kind and true leader who encouraged them during difficult times. The duplicate Lee questioned whether they could trust Lee, who was suspected of being a killer. Lee admitted that he didn't know how June died, but this situation worked in his favor. His duplicate then tried to steer the opinion by stating that Lee was the duplicate. The players, starting to be swayed, considered attacking Lee. However, Isial reminded them not to draw conclusions based on one side of the story. Lee agreed and urged caution. Despite this, another player believed there was no time because a great disaster was approaching. Lee silently praised his duplicate's clever strategy. Lee admitted that he did kill June, and his duplicate felt disappointed, thinking Lee had given up. Lee, with determination, reveals that June is a traitor. However, the attack on June's duplicate fails to eliminate him. Lee's duplicate questions Lee's actions, but suddenly, Lee appears, asking if June is truly a traitor. Lee manipulates the situation to sway opinions. Lee states that if a duplicate kills someone, a notification appears, so duplicates won't kill recklessly. Lee could prove himself by eliminating the duplicate, but instead, he accuses June of being a traitor. This provokes anger in a woman who remembers June's kindness. The woman becomes furious but is suddenly stopped by an arrow from June's duplicate. The number of players and duplicates decreases. Lee's duplicate laughs in satisfaction, but suddenly, June's duplicate is taken down by Sechin. Sechin apologizes to Lee for having doubted him. The players finally realize that June was the duplicate, making Lee the real player. They prepare to face the next challenge. He needs the other players, stating that they will follow his lead, while at the same time, he recalls bad moments from the past. With a small smile, he says it feels like déjà vu. So, with a very confident look, he tells them all about his final plan. Meanwhile, his doppelganger charges towards him, saying that now, after all this has happened, it's all or nothing. Even so, Lee manages to dodge his doppelganger's attack with his sword, and while continuing to fight his doppelganger, he tells the others to use all the gold they have to upgrade their stats. All the players then start upgrading their stats, causing their doppelganger to become unmatched, as all the players grow stronger than before. After the players defeat all the doppelganger, they are informed that the doppelganger stats were the same as the players when they first entered the second floor, so they could complete the mission without any additional casualties because they upgraded their stats with gold. However, Sechin curses because if it weren't for June, the trash, they could have survived without anyone dying. Lee, upon hearing this, says that Sechin might be the most disappointed because he was in the same group as June. Furthermore, he also feels disappointed because his goal was to clear the second floor safely without anyone dying. However, he wonders how the situation is in other regions, as it might be worse than in their area, considering other regions don't have someone like him to guide them. If others have taken the path of the Starkiller, the situation would be very complicated for them, and the battles ahead might be more intense. Although he is still weak, he believes there is a strong reason why he has the special ability to read the guide. So, clenching his fist, he says to himself that although not everything he has experienced so far has been good, as long as there are people who believe in him, he will do everything he can to save as many people as possible. However, at that moment, his thoughts are interrupted by Sechin, who thanks him for surviving thanks to Lee. But Lee says it was because everyone followed his plan. Sechin says that seeing himself still on level 2 despite contributing more, perhaps he has been given a special ability instead, making his level up slower. Hearing this, Lee thinks that Sechin's caution and decision-making skills are impressive, which will be very useful in the future. However, at that moment, Sechin begins to bow while sincerely apologizing for doubting and underestimating him. The other players also start to apologize to Lee, who tells them they don't need to apologize. However, Kim laughs heartily and calls them bad at recognizing someone's true potential, saying they should be like him. However, Isial interrupts, saying that she was the first to notice how extraordinary Lee is, who at that time was biting his fist, mentioning that he wanted to apologize again but with tears. Then, we shift to Sechin, who tells Lee that he knows what he is about to say might sound shameless after everything that has happened, but he wants Lee to lead them from that point onward. This greatly surprises Lee, but he smiles and agrees. Then, we move to a few minutes before the mission ends, when the system informs them of the remaining number of doppelganger players, 1. The players, realizing that one still remains, start saying that they have defeated all the doppelganger. While the players begin to search for the last doppelganger, Lee approaches some bushes and quickly eliminates the last doppelganger. The system notifies them that the doppelganger has been killed and that the mission is complete. We return to the present, where a loudspeaker informs the players that the gold reward will be distributed according to their contribution. The players rejoice as they also receive gold. However, Kim begins to laugh and then strikes a pose, as he is the one who received the gold. While Kim shows off his gold, Lee smiles, realizing that it seems everyone got gold because they followed his plan, and he's happy that everyone received something. This shows that he also received gold. However, at that moment, the system informs him that because he received more than a certain amount, his store rank will increase. So, while looking at the new items in the store, he thinks that's how the system works, and if he wants to buy rare and higher tier items, he needs to upgrade his store rank. However, what he needs now is to upgrade his basic sword level. The level of his basic sword increases. After receiving the notification, he thinks, while remembering the disaster monster, that although he didn't know it at the time, he was using a higher level sword, which is why he passed out after using it. If he can use that type of sword just with gold, it's really a cheap price. With that, he finishes shopping. However, at that moment, he looks towards Isial, who receives a notification that Lee has shared gold with her. Seeing the notification, Isial asks Lee why he suddenly gave her gold. Lee replies that she can keep it because when they were fighting the kobolds and doppelganger, it would have been much harder for them to win if it weren't for her. In a world where they have to take others' lives to survive, the reason they can laugh while trusting each other is because they can help one another. So, he says that it's all thanks to Isial. Hearing this, Isial is silent for a few seconds, then confidently tells Lee that she will become stronger. Then, Isial receives a notification that her Healing Hands ability has increased. Kim, seeing the notification that Lee has shared gold with him, looks at his older brother, who tells him not to do anything strange and to keep up the good work. While Kim leaves, he thinks that Kim is quite competent and could become very useful. This would be useful if it helped him become stronger, but at the same time, he was distracted by Kim calling out to him. With a strange expression, he said that from that moment on, Kim's wish was his command and that he only needed to say what he needed. However, Lee quickly drew his sword and gripped it tightly, thinking that the time had come to test his level 3 basic sword. The scene then changed, with the system notifying everyone that the third floor mission had begun. The third floor mission was a siege war, and this would be the first time you encounter players from other regions. The conditions were clear: your group's mission was to attack, destroy the castle, and seize the altar. Time remaining, a few hours. Penalty for failure, unknown. You have obtained a limited time item, a return crystal, which can only be used on the third floor. While trying to guess the function of the return crystal, Lee saw one of the players observing the castle and asked if this meant they had to kill people. Another player asked what the return crystal was, but at the same time, the guide system informed Lee of something. When he learned the function of the return crystal, he called out to Kim to start attacking immediately, saying that Kim had promised to do whatever was asked of him. The scene then shifted to Kim climbing up the castle, and as he placed his hand on his neck, he said that Lee should have just used words and could have said that he wouldn't actually die here. Even if he were killed on this floor, the return crystal would bring him back to the starting location when he died. As Kim reached the castle gate, he remembered that Lee had said if he did reconnaissance for them, he would receive gold. So, with great enthusiasm, he shouted that he would destroy everything while starting to smash the gate, where the system notified them that the castle gate's durability had decreased. The castle gate's durability dropped %. Kim continued to pound the gate until it finally shattered completely. The castle gate opened for 2 seconds before being reset, and as Kim entered the castle, he remarked that there was no way a simple castle gate could withstand his power. The castle gate was restored, but at the same time, he turned around and saw 2 guards on top of the castle wall. Then he turned left, where the altar was, and realized that there were people around it. However, he remembered that Lee had asked him not to kill anyone because they would figure out the return crystal's function, but with a big smile, he thought that even though Lee had asked him not to do it, they were just trash who feared him. As he walked toward the altar, he thought he would destroy them all. However, at that moment, he was attacked, hitting his face, and as Kim started to bleed and complained about the pain, he wondered what had just happened. Then he looked up toward the altar and wondered if it could be a firearm. Back with Lee, Kim recounted what had happened. He said it fired some sort of magical bullet that hurt like hell. Hearing his story, Lee thought it was crazy because firearms shouldn't be obtainable at this stage, and the proof was that even Sechin, whose class was a warrior, didn't have a firearm. However, another possibility was a Star Slayer, so he thought this would be a tough battle. However, at that moment, Isial quickly turned toward him to say that he didn't need to worry because she would protect his back. Not only would she help, but all the players raised their voices and weapons, saying they were ready too and that he should rely on them. Seeing them, Lee smiled and confidently said he would tell them his plan from that moment on. The scene then shifted to the castle where this player was very nervous and frightened. We see that the person holding the weapon was sitting on another player, but the other player also seemed scared. Back to Lee, who was using the great advantage he gained during the mission on the second floor, the perfect sense, which allowed him to see from a distance. As he looked at the players, he thought that there were only 2 guards at the top of the castle wall, as Kim had mentioned. As Kim began to approach the castle, Isial told Lee that if Kim returned, the enemies would figure out the function of the return crystal. Lee said they wouldn't realize it because they might think about it, but they couldn't be sure. Besides, it was more likely they would think it was something only Kim could do. However, at the same time, the players in the castle began to aim their bows and quickly fired arrows simultaneously at Kim, who shouted that this was completely different from what had just happened. However, the 2 arrows were destroyed by Lee, who, while in the air, said that this gave them a chance to then land on Kim's shoulders and slide into the castle to quickly take down 2 players from the opposing team. They only had one chance. Juno, who saw what Lee had done, said with a wide smile that the enemies would soon figure out how to use the return crystal because of the failed attack on the first turn. Therefore, they had to defeat them immediately. All the other players started moving toward the castle gate, where Kim said he could smash the gate with just 5 stone punches. So, the others had to make sure to follow him closely. He prepared his stone punch, but at the same time, before hitting the castle gate, he was attacked. The gate's durability was destroyed in 1 blow %, and the gate could no longer be restored. As Lee checked on his comrades to make sure they were okay, he was distracted by a player lying on the ground. He then said he didn't know why he had let them live, but that half-hearted mentality would lead him to death because that crazy woman would take advantage of it. However, as Lee looked at him, he thought that it could indeed happen, where we are shown that the girl was indeed a Star Slayer, and her class was a high-level swordsman. Furthermore, she also had the Magic Pala ability at level 3, and her stats were above average and had gold. Lee, seeing those stats, was very surprised and thought she was indeed a Star Slayer and, given her level, she must have killed everyone on the second floor. However, at the same time, the girl named Seoyin noticed Lee's presence. So, she quickly shot at him, hitting the target. Lee, who had been shot, took cover behind the castle wall and used a healing potion, thinking that he hadn't expected to be shot from that distance. It made him realize that the enemy was more hostile than he had anticipated, with no doubt about it. Meanwhile, as he lifted his shirt, he was glad he had prepared beforehand, an advanced leather armor with 0 physical defense and enhanced magical defense. Then, he noticed that the assassin's bullet was draining his MP. If the assassin was using the same type of shop he was, they shouldn't have been able to purchase mana recovery items. Knowing this, he jumped down, and as his comrades moved to accompany him, he thought that the assassin only had a few magical bullets left, so they had to break through. So, everyone began moving toward the altar, but the assassin quickly used their weapon to shoot one of the players who had asked Lee how they would get past the bullets to reach the altar. Lee said that the assassin wasn't capable of using bullets that could harm Kim at the brink of death. Of course, since they were called magical bullets, they could drain MP. So, upon hearing that, Lee mentioned that the amount of MP would be crucial. Then Lee said it was true. We then shift to the battle where the player who had been shot began to heal, and as everyone moved toward the altar, the assassin continued shooting at them. However, Lee's group of players kept healing thanks to Isial's ability. The assassin, realizing this, quickly kicked a human chair to alert the others while pointing their gun to get them to leave. Lee, heading toward the altar, thought that what happened from this point on would determine how everything ended, and if the battle broke out, there would be comrades dying from the magical bullets, so they needed to reach the altar as quickly as possible. However, at the same time, 2 opposing players launched an attack, but Lee dodged the first player with a powerful kick, then avoided the second player by quickly delivering a blow to the nape, knocking them out. But at the same time, a magical bullet aimed at his head, and Lee blocked it with his sword, causing him to lose his weapon. The assassin, seeing this, thought that Lee had reacted to the shot, so he quickly aimed at Junho's head. Seeing one of his comrades defeated, he looked around and thought that more and more people would end up dead. With clenched teeth, Lee thought that the assassin probably didn't know they would return even after dying. So, he wondered how the assassin could wear such a face while killing people, and with a small smile, said that the small group of trash was interesting. Hearing this, Lee became extremely angry, then began gripping his sword and quickly activated the level 3 basic swordsman ability. After that, we shift to Kim, who was with 2 opposing players, but Kim, while using his ability, said that it was over because his brother had reached the altar, so he didn't need to hold back anymore. Using the level 2 stone fist, and as the players fighting Kim fell unconscious, we returned to Lee, where the assassin asked who Lee was because he was so strong despite being only level 2. But Lee, smiling, asked if it wasn't strange for him to reach that level so quickly. This made the assassin think, but at the same time, the platform they were on began to glow, where the system notified them that they had occupied altar 1 of 3. Please remove the opposing players from the altar. Hearing this notification, Lee thought that they needed 3 people to fully occupy the altar, but before that, he had to deal with his opponent. Quickly, the assassin took control by shooting, but Lee quickly countered with his sword. However, the assassin blocked the attack with his weapon, and as Lee launched several attacks, the assassin, while dodging, wondered how Lee could react to his shots. But at the same time, Lee prepared to launch a powerful attack, where the assassin dodged with a leap and quickly fired 2 shots, his expression completely changing to one of shock as Lee managed to dodge both shots. Smiling, the assassin said that Lee seemed like a swordsman and one of the strongest players in his area. Junho was known as a genius in ping-pong. In professional matches, where a game was ongoing, it wasn't easy to return all the balls just by using your eyes. That's why, as the level of the game increased, more players read their opponent's posture or watch them closely, and the ability to do so and predict where the ball would come from was considered extraordinary. Lee's nickname when he was a professional ping-pong player was the prediction genius, and he had gained an advantage thanks to clap. After the assassin dodged Lee's attack, it was said while looking at Lee that the bastard had higher stats than him. But at the same time, Sechin told Lee that they were done. Kim commented that they needed to finish it quickly before the assassin returned. Hearing this, the assassin asked if the return crystal functioned as a revival tool. Lee replied by saying that it did, though there was no point in knowing that now. But with a serious look, Lee said that even though the assassin had a hidden ability that allowed him to land a hit, he would be able to endure it. So, he prepared again because he just needed to take the risk of damage and make sure to finish it. But at the same time, the assassin asked Lee if he believed that he had won. We see that he was spending his gold to upgrade his shooting ability to level 4. When Lee saw this, he quickly charged at him. But as he saw Lee coming, the assassin began to stop him, rendering him completely helpless. While his comrades ran toward him, calling his name, the system notified them that the mission on the 3rd floor was completed.